I have walked these sands for thousands of years. I have watched empires rise from the mud, touch the stars, and crumble back into dust. Here, beneath my feet, lie the remains of Babylon, the jewel of Mesopotamia, the city of gold. You come here seeking the hanging gardens, do you not? You seek the terraces dripping with emerald vines, the waterfalls defying gravity in the middle of a scorched desert. You search for a miracle. You have been told the romantic tale, the great King Nebuchadnezzar II, commanding the earth to bloom to cure the homesickness of his beautiful Median wife. Queen Amytis missed the green mountains of her youth. It is a beautiful story, a monument built purely out of love, a wonder of the world, a masterpiece of ancient engineering, standing proudly as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. But there is a problem with this beautiful dream. As I wander through these sun-baked bricks, feeling the history in the dust, I must tell you a harsh, unyielding truth. You are looking in the wrong place. The legendary Hanging Gardens of Babylon were never actually built in Babylon. For centuries, modern archaeologists have relentlessly dug through every single inch of this ruined, forgotten city. They have mapped the Grand Ishtar Gate in all its blue-glazed glory. They have uncovered the massive defensive walls that protected the city. They have even unearthed the foundations of King Nebuchadnezzar's own royal palace. The historical records of his building projects are vast and detailed. But in all this searching, they have found not a single trace, not a single brick of a garden, not one hidden water reservoir that could possibly support a massive, elevated forest in this arid climate. There are no traces of complex hydraulic systems, no fossilized roots of exotic trees, no evidence of aqueducts leading to the palace. Nothing, just the dry earth and the echoing silence of a phantom wonder. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are a ghost. Think about it. A garden of that magnitude would require an unbelievable amount of water, thousands of gallons a day, hoisted high into the air. Nebuchadnezzar was a king who loved to boast. He carved his achievements into stone and stamped his name on millions of baked bricks. He wrote about the grand temples he built, the massive defensive walls he fortified, and the sacred procession streets he paved in gold. Yet in all the thousands of cuneiform tablets unearthed from his reign, he never mentions a hanging garden, not once. If you built the greatest botanical wonder in human history, wouldn't you write it down for eternity? Wouldn't you ensure the gods knew of your glorious achievement? The silence of the Babylonian clay is deafening. Even the father of history, the famous Greek writer Herodotus, who visited Babylon mere decades after Nebuchadnezzar's death, wrote extensively and meticulously about the city's towering walls and massive, awe-inspiring ziggurats. But he wrote absolutely nothing about a hanging garden. Not a single word about trees floating in the sky. How could a man who documented everything miss a literal mountain of trees floating in the desert sky? The answer is simple, yet it shatters centuries of romantic mythology. Because it wasn't there to be seen. The Babylon you know is a ghost, a grand illusion. To find the real gardens, we must leave these empty ruins behind. We must follow the intricate trail of a 2,000-year-old historical misunderstanding, a game of telephone played across ancient empires, leading us north to a much darker place. If the gardens weren't in Babylon, who put them there in our history books? The answer lies not with the people of Mesopotamia, but with the Greeks and Romans. Writers like Strabo, Diodorus Siculus, and Quintus Curtius Rufus painted vivid, intoxicating pictures of the Hanging Gardens. They describe thick stone columns, layers of reeds and lead, and massive engines pumping water from the Euphrates River. Their words shaped the imagination of the Western world for millennia. But there is a fatal flaw in their beautifully written testimonies. None of these men ever saw the gardens, not a single one of them. They wrote their accounts centuries after the supposed wonder would have flourished. They were compiling rumors, copying fragmented texts from older, lost manuscripts, and playing an ancient, monumental game of telephone across empires. They were outsiders, looking eastward into a vast, complex land they barely understood. To a scholar sitting safely in a library in Alexandria or Rome, Thousands of years of Mesopotamian history were simply compressed into one word: Babylon. But their greatest limitation was linguistic. They simply didn't know how to read cuneiform. The ancient wedge-shaped script of the Sumerians, Akkadians, and Babylonians had become a dead, silent code. Without the ability to read the original records, the classical writers relied heavily on soldiers' tales and highly distorted, fragmented legends. In their distant minds, the word Babylon simply became a convenient catch-all term for any great, mysterious Mesopotamian capital. It was the only eastern city grand enough and famous enough in the West to securely anchor their spectacular myths. They constantly conflated and confused different kings, different queens, and entirely different cities separated by hundreds of miles. The beautiful legend of Queen Amytis missing her mountainous homeland? It sounds suspiciously like a romanticized Greek tragedy rather than a Middle Eastern political reality. When the Greeks heard whispers of an unimaginably magnificent garden built by a fierce and powerful Eastern king, they naturally but incorrectly assumed it must belong to the most famous city they knew, Babylon. And so, the historical lie was written down in ink. And unfortunately for the truth, ink outlasted the crumbling clay. The true visionary creator of the gardens was entirely erased from the historical narrative. His greatest achievement, the culmination of his life's work, was mistakenly handed over to his most hated enemy. To find the absolute truth of this ancient wonder, we must finally leave the sluggish Euphrates River behind. We must travel over 300 miles to the north, following the rushing, violent waters of the Tigris River. We are leaving the city of merchants and priests and entering a much harsher, much more violent land. We must look beyond the Babylonian ghost and seek out a king who truly mastered the untamed forces of nature. Prepare yourselves, for we are about to enter the terrifying domain of Nineveh, the capital of the ancient Assyrian Empire. Welcome to Nineveh. Today it lies near Mosul in modern Iraq, completely buried under thick layers of dust, dirt, and time. But in the 7th century BC, this was the beating heart of the Assyrian Empire, the most terrifying, ruthless, and highly efficient military machine the ancient world had ever seen. While Babylon was a wealthy city of priests, astronomers, and merchants, Nineveh was a fiercely proud city of warriors, and its absolute master was King Sennacherib. History remembers Sennacherib primarily as a brutal, unforgiving tyrant. He was the king who famously laid siege to Jerusalem, the conqueror who marched his massive armies across the ancient Near East, leaving a terrifying trail of ash, destroyed walls, and utterly broken nations in his wake. But there is a hidden side to Sennacherib that the biblical texts and his ancient enemies rarely mention. He was not just a warrior, he was an absolute visionary. He was a brilliant engineering genius. When Sennacherib inherited the throne, he boldly moved the capital to Nineveh, initiating one of the largest construction projects in history. He swore to make it a magnificent city that would completely eclipse Babylon. He called it the palace without a rival. He didn't just build massive defensive walls. He sought to literally reshape the very earth itself. He was deeply obsessed with water, complex horticulture, and the ultimate taming of wild, chaotic nature. He considered himself a supreme master of the natural world, manipulating entire rivers and building artificial mountains to his will. He commanded his armies to bring exotic flora and rare fruit trees from the far edges of his conquered lands right into the heart of Assyria. Thanks to the brilliant detective work of modern scholars, particularly Dr. Stephanie Daly of Oxford, the silent, buried clay of Nineveh has finally begun to speak and reveal its long-lost secrets. Deep in the ruined foundations of Sennacherib's palace, archaeologists uncovered this remarkable prismatic clay tablet. It is completely covered in the dense, highly precise wedges of ancient Assyrian cuneiform script. I remember watching the royal scribes carving these exact lines, boasting of the king's ultimate glory to the gods. On this specific prism, King Sennacherib does not merely list his brutal military conquests or the cities he burned. He writes, with immense and unprecedented pride, of a massive, unparalleled engineering project. He explicitly describes planting a high, terraced garden that directly imitated the lush, wild Amanus Mountains. A botanical wonderland filled with all kinds of aromatic plants, exotic orchard fruit trees, and towering timber. A literal artificial mountain painstakingly built right next to the grand royal palace of Nineveh. Does this not sound exactly like the legendary hanging gardens that the Greeks described centuries later? The descriptions match perfectly. But Sennacherib didn't just plant a few trees on a hill and simply hope for rain. He had to solve the ultimate, impossible problem that had doomed the Babylon theory from the very start. He had to solve the massive, daily problem of water in a scorching, unforgiving desert climate. And to do that, he would have to pull off an engineering miracle that would defy the very laws of nature. Nineveh's geography is fundamentally different from Babylon's. Babylon is completely flat, relying entirely on the sluggish, slow-moving Euphrates River. Nineveh, however, sits near the rugged foothills of the northern mountains, making it actually possible to manipulate gravity for water flow. But gravity alone wasn't enough. Sennacherib needed an absolute ocean of water every single day to keep his massive artificial mountain alive. So, the visionary king initiated a marvel of ancient infrastructure, an engineering project that would dwarf almost anything the ancient world had ever seen. He ordered the construction of a massive, complex network of canals, dams, and aqueducts stretching over 30 miles into the Zagros Mountains. Today, at a remote place called Jirwan in northern Iraq, modern archaeologists have found the stunning, undeniable remains of his greatest waterwork. Rising from the dust is a massive stone aqueduct designed to carry a rushing river across a wide valley with perfect mathematical precision. This colossal structure was painstakingly built using an estimated 2 million massive blocks of perfectly dressed and waterproofed limestone. It is a feat of engineering so incredibly advanced that it actually predates the famous Roman aqueducts by over 300 years. Sennacherib was so fiercely protective of this water lifeline that he carved a terrifying royal inscription right into the foundation stones. The king explicitly warned that anyone who dared to divert the water away from his great garden would face brutal divine punishment. He called upon the mighty Assyrian gods to utterly destroy the lives and lands of anyone who touched his precious artificial river. Through sheer will, brilliant math, and millions of stones, Sennacherib successfully brought a roaring, rushing river right to his palace doorstep. But arriving at the base of the palace was only half the battle. The garden was built on high, towering stone terraces. How did he lift thousands of gallons of water straight up into the sky? This is where the Assyrian king outsmarted history itself. The classical Greek writers mention that the hanging gardens utilized massive, complex screws to continuously draw water upwards from the river below. For centuries, modern historians naturally assumed this meant the famous Archimedes screw, a brilliant hydraulic device supposedly invented by the Greek mathematician around 250 BC. But there is a glaring, mathematically impossible problem with this assumption. The magnificent gardens existed long before the Greek inventor was even born. How could a Babylonian or Assyrian king possibly use a piece of advanced technology that wouldn't be invented for another 3.5 centuries? Once again, Sennacherib's own detailed cuneiform texts provide the stunning, undeniable answer. He did not need to wait for the Greeks to invent it. He wrote extensively of casting massive bronze cylinders in giant clay molds and wrapping them intricately in thick, spiraling copper blades. The Assyrians independently invented the continuous water-raising screw. They engineered these heavy metal devices 350 years before Archimedes claimed the credit. By turning these giant bronze screws, the water from the aqueduct was effortlessly caught in the copper spirals and forced violently upwards against gravity. By stacking multiple screws in a massive relay system, the Assyrians could lift thousands of gallons of water continuously to the highest mountain terraces. It is a revelation that completely rewrites the history of engineering, shattering the long-held Western monopoly on ancient mechanical innovation. Deep inside Sennacherib's palace, damaged stone reliefs miraculously confirm this. They clearly depict exotic trees growing on columned stone terraces, with water flowing freely. This was the real wonder of the ancient world. An artificial mountain located in Nineveh, roaring endlessly with the sound of cascading water. It was powered entirely by complex bronze screws, mathematically perfect aqueducts, and the brutal, unyielding ambition of a terrifying empire. It was a masterpiece of ancient engineering, built not out of sweet, romantic love for a homesick queen, as the Greeks falsely claimed. It was built as a supreme, arrogant display of absolute imperial power. Even Mother Nature herself had been conquered by the mighty Assyrians. If Sennacherib's garden was so magnificently built and so deeply embedded into the mountain rock, why did it completely vanish from the earth? Why did the world forget Nineveh and mistakenly give the eternal glory to Babylon? Because empires, no matter how invincible, always fall. The Assyrians had ruled the ancient world with an unforgiving, brutal iron fist. For centuries, they burned rival cities to ash, enslaved entire nations, and demanded heavy tributes. And the hatred against them fermented. In the year 612 BC, less than a century after Sennacherib built his incredible wonder, the oppressed world finally struck back. A massive, vengeful coalition of Babylonians, Medes, and Scythians marched their combined armies toward the great walls of Nineveh. They surrounded the city, they dammed the rivers, and finally, after a brutal siege, they breached the impenetrable gates of the Assyrian capital. The invaders showed absolutely no mercy. They slaughtered the defenders in the streets and looted the unimaginable wealth of the empire. And then they set their torches to Sennacherib's grand palace without a rival. The great capital was consumed by a catastrophic inferno. The fire was so incredibly intense that it actually baked the clay tablets in the royal library, ironically preserving the Assyrian records, even as the magnificent city directly above them was violently reduced to a smoldering pile of ashes. The invading armies deliberately smashed the great stone aqueducts, brutally cutting off the vital water lifeline to the artificial mountain. The massive, intricate bronze water screws were ripped from their foundations and callously melted down to forge new weapons of war. Without its daily ocean of water, the glorious artificial mountain of trees quickly dried up, died, and was swallowed by the drifting desert sands. Nineveh was utterly annihilated, wiped from the face of the earth so completely that its true, magnificent legacy was buried in the dark. With Nineveh completely gone, Babylon became the undisputed, magnificent master of Mesopotamia. When the Babylonians conquered the region, they completely absorbed its history and its greatest achievements as their own. Over the centuries, the true memory of Sennacherib's magnificent mountain garden survived only in faint whispers and fragmented, dying tales. By the time Alexander the Great arrived, and the Greek historians began writing their books, the geographical distinction between Nineveh and Babylon had completely blurred into a single mythological idea of the mysterious East. The real hanging gardens of Nineveh were dead, but their beautiful ghost was transplanted 300 miles south to Babylon. And there it lived on forever, immortalized as a wonder of the world in the pages of Western literature. As I stand here once more in the Babylonian dust, looking at the empty ruins, I do not mourn the lie. History is a remarkably fragile thing. It is shaped by the victors, confused by the relentless passage of time, and all too often, accidentally rewritten by the ignorant. But the Hanging Gardens were real. They were an actual marvel of the ancient world. They were just built by a different king, in a different city, for a very different reason. The ultimate truth is often buried deep, waiting for those willing to sift through the sands of time.